Well, hi everyone. Welcome to the spring semester of the Tuesday Roundtable. This is our first session. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't signed in, please do. If you're here as part of the class, just make sure that you put the class. And also, if you're collecting points for the Global Medallion, make sure to see me at the end of the presentation. Okay? You have food, as you can see. Please eat, and you have some goodies as well. Well, today we have Dr. Bina Sengar. Dr. Bina Sengar is an assistant professor at Dr. Baba Saheb.
It's okay, just say India, it's fine.
Dr. Baba Saheb, Ambedkar Maratwada University in India, in the History and Ancient Indian Culture Department. Her specializations are rural and indigenous people's histories in South Asia and India. Her research engages the socio-environmental and medical histories of indigenous and rural communities of Western India. Dr. Sengar created the Rural South Asian Studies Network, a cultural heritage network of the historical and ecological legacy inherent in the rural, indigenous, and urban cultures of localized and broadly South Asian regions. She holds a PhD from Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda. She has engaged in numerous research projects, including under the sponsorship of the Wellcome Trust, UK since 2013, and the Indian Council of Historical Research since 2017. Dr. Sengar's Fulbright Nehru Project studies the development of structural growth in the area of indigeneity.
That's right.
It explores the conceptual understanding of transnational ideas of the indigenous while also examining the growth of indigenous solidarity, which produce paradigm shifts in favor of indigenous communities with respect to the 21st century challenges such as climate change. The research and teaching components of Dr. Sengar's project aim to systematically explore the ethno-history of indigenous communities of India in the context of global history to enable practical and theoretical understandings of indigenous communities' histories. So please help me giving Dr. Sengar a warm welcome and thank you for the presentation.
Thanks a lot for FIU Global Learning Center and Tuesday seminar for giving me this very good opportunity to interact with scholars from all over the FIU and beyond, the peripheries of the university. I had been here since August 2018 and I got a very good opportunity to interact with several scholars from different parts of the FIU. But Tuesday seminar, I could see some very good friends whom I met beyond the FIU's scholarly regime. They have come over here with and interacting. And I hope to, after this talk of mine, I hope to have a lot of insights and your comments, which I look forward. The present talk, as you could see, it talks about the most important discoveries of the 21st century exist not in the realms of science, medicine, or technology, but rather in the dawning awareness of the Earth's limit and how those limits will affect human evolution. So, as one of my colleagues, she read my profile, I'm looking into the indigenous knowledge systems and indigenous knowledge histories. And in such context, it becomes fairly interesting to know that many of these societies which we study, for a very long time we had been studying them through the perspective of science, biology, anthropology, and anthropology to such an extent that it had become second name for the illness among the indigenous society. So I was just a couple of days ago, I was talking to a friend and he said that rest of the people in the world, they have illnesses and we have anthropologists. So that has become the grave amount of interference and encroachment on the areas of the peripheries of knowledge, where the essential integrity of a knowledge-based society is questioned. Because for so many centuries, like especially after the 16th century onwards, the realm of knowledge accruing from the indigenous society was mainly for the benefits of science, medicine, and technology, and to a certain extent also for the social sciences for their own ethnographic narratives, which we need to question again. And so the particular, as you could see, the title of the talk goes Indigenous Cultures and Global Ecological Challenges. 20th century in its last few decades and 21st century right from its beginning has started coming up with the grave issues of climate change and also the destruction of the ecological spaces world over. In such conditions, somehow science, biology, technology is trying to seek the solution through various renewable and non-renewable questions and coming up with the alternative energy sources. But even then, the gravity of the ecological exploitation continues. And somehow the solution, we are going back to indigenous societies and their knowledge systems. And therefore, this is actually a book where I contributed, and there's a group of scholars. We are working on this whole issue of coming up with the models. There are biological models, of course, the modeling and engineering is already going on, but what are the social sciences alternative for these modelings for the societies and how we can contribute for this global challenge of ecological disruption. So we worked on it and we tried to work on different models. One of the models which I worked in India was from, it's an upland region, which actually not entirely a wetland situation, but it is a forest and a riverine ecology where I work with the tribals of Ajanta, where I worked on this particular write-up. So there were some very important issues which we delve on this idea that what are the social models which should be worked to work on the ecological regeneration or ecological reclamation of the knowledge systems. I will go slightly to the historical models. So Patrick Geddes in 1923, he came up with the valley section from hills to sea. Subbarao defined, so what are these, when we talk about, there is a whole lot of debate and what is indigeneity, what are indigenous, how we define indigeneity, who are indigenes, whether they are place, space oriented or whether they are the displayed culture oriented. What defines the indigeneity? So there had been several arguments in the historical and the sociological narratives itself. 1923, Patrick Geddes came up with a theory of the valley section from hills to sea, where he said that a settlement pattern defines, the urban model defines that who are going to be non-indigenous and who are going to be indigenous. Because the valley to sea areas will be the places where the migrant communities will be coming and developing the urban centers. Somehow there are critiques against it as well, because there had been urban models where the migration has not disrupted the ecological model. I'll be explaining about it. Subbarao is an archaeologist, was an archaeologist and quite a person from India, and he worked on the South Asian archaeological systems, and he talks about three areas of settlements. He talks about areas of cultures of isolations, cultures of relative isolation and settlements in his book called Personality of India, where he talked about the cultures of isolation and relative isolation defined the ecological cultures, or so called as tribal cultures or indigenous cultures, because they are the cultures which are thoroughly dependent on the ecology of their isolated environment or relative isolated environments. Ramchandra Guha in the late 2010 or so, he started working on the he developed the point of ecological society, which I'm working on further, which when I'm developing my theory, I'm also working on the same idea of ecological societies. And he said that there are ecological cultures and non-ecological cultures. He used a very a term called omnivorous cultures, who don't go into the idea of ecology and its sanctity, but raid the ecological space for their greed and luxuries without even realizing what detrimental results the particular attempt to butcher the ecology can cause. And he uses these terms when you'll go through his writing, you'll come across these all terminologies, which he fairly try to counter upon. So Ramchandra Guha is talking about ecological cultures which are not necessarily be isolated or necessarily be valley section or sea. So to certain extent, Patrick Geddes and Subbarao are being further critiqued by Ramchandra Guha in his approach. While developing this whole notion, I'm also looking into this whole notion of ecological societies, because when we say indigeneity, somehow we take away the whole notion of nature in it. So we have to understand, which has been a growing debate not only since now, but it has been growing on since the right from the inception of the human cultural concepts, because whether we should rule the nature or let nature allow us to work the way our social and cultural political institution had been an ongoing debate. So whether it is right, how far it is correct to call indigenous as ecological society, that remains a context of debate. What are the urban models, and why there is why we put the question of ecological society? What are the threats which these all notions of non-ecological components are bringing about? So there is a notion, there is a term which is quite used by the urban planners and also the environmental engineers, is urban heat islands, because many of the urban centers are not following the norms of the ecological surrounding. They are trying to live up certain set of lifestyle which doesn't follows the decorum of the biome or the habitat to which the natural space is. As a result, we have the notion of urban heat islands, which are the major source of global climatic change as well. They are causing all the carbon sequestration. They are the hub where lots of energy is unnecessarily utilized, and to a certain extent that even an energy crisis has come because of that. So what are the solutions to it? There are environmental, human and environmental challenges which are happening because of it. We are not able to sustain a balance because of the kind of models we have adopted in our urban settlement pattern. And what could be these human models to work upon? So there are issues of indigenous knowledge systems which are coming to rescue for this urban heat island. So you have indigenous knowledge systems conserving the biological diversity in the areas of where the particular urban island is situated, and also the community-based conservation which need to be looked upon. So developing a model for human environment sustainability in the cultural landscapes requires the restoration of biological, ecological and cultural diversity, together with structural and functional landscape integrity and heterogeneity as total, a landscape eco-diversity. So whether it's an urban island which has been created in a particular territory, or whether we are trying to understand the ecological societies and their models, we have to understand what are the landscape eco-diversity which constitute to particular land-based system or maybe a land island. So the question comes, how to do it? We have all these big jargons, we have big words to work on, but how we are going to work on it? Is it it's already going on. Collectively, environmental engineers are working in their periphery, social scientists are trying to work out, a biological scientist and human artist, everybody is working on their own models, but how to integrate it all? Whether an landscape eco-integrity is possible, or if it is possible, what are the modalities to do that? So for this research which is ongoing right now, which I'm doing right now while I'm affiliated to FIU, I'm looking into two different models. One is a model from India and one is a model from Florida. And I'm looking into Seminole and Miccosukee communities and how they are being instrumental in restoring or maintaining whatever land and ecological components are there in their area of Florida. So this is Florida, which has seen a lot of changes in the last 2 centuries. 200 years ago, what Florida was and today is sky and land. What we see today of Florida is totally different from what it used to be 200 years ago. There are a lot of compromises which have been done on the land and water management systems. And a biggest challenge to this whole issue is the whole question and contribution which an ecological society can put forth has never been taken, unfortunately, into account. A society which was there nurturing a particular ecological model for generations and ancestral wise, why it has been not been integrated while developing an landscape eco-diverse or eco-integrated model. The other 2-3 days ago, I was in Everglades Coalition Conference, and it was pretty surprising for me to know that there was hardly any representation from the Miccosukee and Seminole community. Please correct me if I'm going politically incorrect way, but I'm looking it as an outside, like as an Indian observer. I'm coming all the way from India, and this is not something which we don't do in India. Because whenever an ecological model or any plan is made, even though we are not as sophisticated as America, but we make it a point that stakeholders should be there in the meeting and their knowledge systems, their ecological model should be respected and integrated while developing a model for ecological planning. So in Everglades Coalition Conference, there was not a single representation on the dais from either the Miccosukee or Seminole community. Although like my 5 months of research has introduced me and made me understand that there are really good models which are instituted by these communities to sustain the ecological diversity in this region. Not only ecological diversity, but to sustain the balance in life of land and people. So the worst thing which happened other than that is many of the territorial regions, because land and ecological models go hand in hand. We cannot create an ecological model unless and until we have a land to prove it, and land with its own community culture to prove it that this kind of model is possible. Because there is a model which has been living here for long and it has proven its viability, both in ecological and cultural terms. So why this aspect was not taken into account? So when we take into, I know many of you already know these, but just for quick revision, a couple of students are also there. So we have regions, so we have northern uplands in Florida, we have central highlands and plateau, and then we have coastal plains, and then we have the southern Everglades. If I'm not wrong, if I can just show you. Yeah, so if you could see, these are the waterlands or what we known as wetland zones. So below the drainage areas of Kissimmee River, Lake Okeechobee, and all the southern wetland, which is popularly known as Everglades. It came to be known as Everglades in late 18th century. When the British geographers, they came and they saw glades means grass, they just saw grass, full of land, full of grass and full of wetlands. And so it was like ever, like so far as your eye go, it's only ever growing and ever not ceasing grassland. So that's why they called it Everglades. And so these were the highlands and the plateau region, which was mainly used for the grazing and the cattle rearing and agriculture purposes. But the southern portion was mainly in hunting, fishing, and a model which was evolved by the Miccosukee and Seminole community, how to survive in these waterlands, in these wetlands. There were the resilient way of living, which was only known until today, only known to Miccosukee and Seminole communities. So actually these are the essential indigenous knowledge systems, traditional knowledge systems, and patterns to live in an ecological model. So but somehow we all know that in 1930s there was a big flood which happened. By that time there was already a lot of urban development evolved in the coastal areas of Miami and Naples and Tampa. So a lot of people were already living there. So when the flood came, it not only disrupted the Everglades, but it disrupted a lot of urban settlements, because of which it was decided that the whole water management system should be re-governed. So whatever water which comes from northern part should be managed in such a way so that the urban settlement, the red portion, should not get flooded again. And therefore we know that the whole the whole conservation water management system started happening. What happened? So ecologically we have coastal and river plains, we have Lake Okeechobee, east and west coast, we have rivers, drainage systems of Caloosahatchee, Kissimmee, Indian and others, and then we have wetlands and grasslands which are there in Florida. These are again, when we see to the whole patterns, when we talk about wetlands, it's important to understand that in the management area, we don't put any of the models of the territories of course, because they are independent nations, they are sovereign nations, Miccosukee and Seminole nations, but we don't put them in the understanding of wetlands, or we never try to include in the broad patterns. So this is a map of 1821 Florida, and if you could see these, this is a Spanish made map, and these are the upland areas, and this is the direct Kissimmee River which is coming down to Lake Okeechobee, but there is no connectivity of the rivers with the Kissimmee. The drainage is pretty free flowing. This was the model which was existing in Florida in the 19th century, which allowed a free flow of community engagements in the southern and the upland areas. So there was a kind of economic activity which prevailed. So the northern parts of the Seminole and the migrant community also which were coming here in the Florida, they were practicing ranching and agriculture, but in the southern portion they were adopting the traditional what you could say fishing, hunting and sustaining the native corn and other species of other agricultural components. So this is another model. So this is when after before 1932 flooding, this was the way the Everglades was flowing, and this is after 1932, this is the model which is coming up. So the whole flow of the water is being changed. It has totally been diverted the way it used to exist in Florida. Because of which what happened? We all know about, I'm not going to speak too much about it. We have red tides, we have blue-green algae, we have nitrogen release and loss of native flora and fauna. It is all happening because the flow of water which was not supposed to be like in a very forceful manner coming to the Everglades has started coming there, and because of that there is a lot of release and nitrogen cycle is getting imbalanced, and there is a flooding of Everglades, severe destruction of heritage, tree islands and ecology of Indian reservations. These are certain very crucial aspects which do need to be worked on, but somehow they are not getting worked up. This Colton Ward remains a very famous National Geographic researcher and documenting photographer, and he is right now doing his advocacy through National Geographic plans, and he is working a lot on that, and he is proposing that at present the little bit ecology of this whole region, Everglades and the northern drainage areas of Florida are maintained because a large amount of land is under Seminole and their partners who are managing it through the ranching. So to a certain extent the cover of greenery is left, is balanced. Of course it has its own negative effects because of the release of various phosphorus and chemical imbalances which is polluting the Everglades and other drainage pattern systems, but even then a little bit amount of ecological balance is sustained because of these practices. But somehow this whole challenge is yet to be studied because we still don't find a voice for the reinstating or reclaiming the ecological losses already borne by the Indian reservation areas in South Florida in last 2 centuries. This is another because this is not a conventional ranch. The kind of ranching which is practiced in South Florida is not a conventional ranching which is seen in prairies or in Australia. It has more wetland ranching. So it, as you could see in the picture by Carlton Ward. So the question comes, what are the norms followed in South Florida in terms of wetland management? We know that there are very few wetlands throughout the world which are being conserved and taken care of through international norms, as per the international norms. Till 2013, wetlands, especially Everglades, was part of the international convention, but since 2013, it's not. It has its own technical issues to be discussed upon. So now I'm coming back to the wetlands. I'm coming to wetlands of the global and some of the models which we see in South Asia. So healthy wetlands, which include some iconic sites as Everglades, Pantanal, Sundarbans and Okavango Delta, not only provide most of the fresh water, they also function as natural infrastructure defending us from the often catastrophic effects of floods, droughts, storm surges and other natural hazards. So conserving a wetland is not just a matter of maintaining the urban heat islands or sustaining the viability of urban heat islands, but also to know that how far it will work as an ecological model. When we talk about, I'll come to Sundarban. So Sundarban, I'll just show you a small picture of it. Sundarban wetlands in Bengal, India is one of the largest delta wetland zone in the world. And it is also one of the largest growing because Sundarban has Ganges and Brahmaputra expanding it. And it is part of the Ramsar Convention. It is part of the Wetlands International Association, and we are trying to work as much possible to sustain the livelihood models the way the traditional or the ecological societies of these zones were having right from the beginning. So Sundarban is predominantly owned in terms of the ecological model and sustainable modalities. No government agency is working without the consent and the knowledge practices owned by these communities. So rather 80% of the workforce which is working for the Sundarban Delta and its conservation and restoration and reclamation is coming from the communities living in Sundarban Delta, who are Rajbanshis and the Santhal communities of this region. So they are the knowledge owners and they are the communities which are restoring this model. And how this model is being harnessed is through the traditional knowledge, cultural practices and innovations which can contribute significantly in the disaster risk reduction as well. So their models in terms of their community knowledge, their tradition is also continuously used to implement it. Community participation, as I already said, the 80% workforce doesn't come from outside but comes from the community itself. And ecological societies helping reinstate ecological habit by, it's very like you might have read about or may have come across that Sundarban also has the largest number of the Bengal tiger, and almost like whatever percentage of tigers we have, more than 50% of the tigers in that habitat are man-eating tigers. So even then it has never been becoming a question because the communities have lived with those the predatory which are detrimental for the human societies, and even then Sundarban remains the project tiger habitat as well. So it is a model which is trying its level best to have an inclusive approach for an ecological society. And trying to harness as much as possible to reinstate and reclaim the land of this habitat, because wetlands of Bengal Delta are not only helpful in maintaining the ecology of South Bengal, but they are also, Bay of Bengal is one of the most turbulent bay in the Indian Ocean. But during the tsunami also, because of the Sundarbans, we were able to sustain, and there was not much hazard experienced by Bay of Bengal in the Bengal area rather than the one which was experienced in the southern parts of India, because there the ecological societies are not much consulted the way it has been consulted in the Sundarban areas. So that brings us to a modality that if an inclusive approach is adopted while creating an ecological model, it becomes a sustainable approach and also a approach which decreases the intensity of loss borne by any urban heat island. Because right next to Sundarbans you have Calcutta, which is one of the largest city and urban center of the world. But even then, it could never experience any of the biggest hazard, because this wetland has worked for centuries together as a major what you could say, a resistance force against the natural calamities, and also to sustain the ecology of the region. These are the sociological approaches, these are the sociological or the social science methods, the humanities methods, which help us to bring together an landscape eco-integrated approach while developing a futuristic model which are being faced by the societies at large globally. I'll come back to now a little bit on Seminole. So this is one of the vintage pic I took from internet, of course, about the Seminole community and their methods of sustaining the wetlands. So at present also, a lot of their economic activities, a lot of their social traditions depend on the wetland habitation. But there is a non-inclusive approach for the communities when it comes in terms of their traditional knowledge, which somehow we all know that the Everglades Reservation Park actually didn't allow the Miccosukee community to live in the Everglades National Park, and when in 1950s, when Everglades National Park was made, all the Miccosukee community were pushed to the Tamiami Trail. They were not let to live in the Everglades National Park, because it was considered that if they will live in the Everglades National Park, it will not allow the national park to have its natural way of growth. It's pretty what you could say, curious for me to understand, because when all over the world we are taking help from the ecological societies to sustain the ecological spaces, why Miccosukee and Seminoles are being pushed away? I may be politically incorrect, but this is my understanding, this is my world, and when I go back to South Asia, this is the model we'll follow. And we take, because it takes a lot of efforts to train freshmen who don't belong to a particular ecological society to let them know what exactly the particular species are. On the contrary, when you take an expertise from the ecological societies itself, they know everything about that particular natural environment. So it not only reduces the cost of regeneration and balancing the environmental space, but it also enhances the available knowledge. Because many of the knowledge which has been coded or documented by the outside experts doesn't meet the standards or the knowledge already available in a particular society which had been living there for ages. And also the mechanisms, because an outside perception cannot match the expertise from the people of the model itself, the ecological society itself. So although historically we believe that Southeast tribes from the Seminole or the Creek Confederacy came in the Florida only when they were pushed from there, but history has to speak some other things as well. Everglades or the wetlands was not something unknown to live in by the communities of Southeastern tribes, because North Carolina, South Carolina and Mississippi areas have their own regional riverine wetlands and also the coastal wetlands. So these things need to be understood as well while we develop the whole models of ecological societies in Southeast tribes. And I really want inputs from here because I'm an outsider only for last 6 months, not even 6 months, rather only for last 2 months I'm studying Florida. So please pardon my any mistakes, and because I really want now comments to come. So 2nd February we are going to have World Wetlands Day. So let's celebrate it with Seminole and Miccosukee and try to learn from them. Thank you for listening patiently, and I look forward for your comments and questions.